Little girl calls 911 to arrest her dad after hearing her brother scream. When the police arrive, everyone is shocked by the scene they witness. On the night it happened, the wind was relentless, rattling the old windows of the Henderson home in Brookhaven with a persistent, bone-chilling howl. Each gust seemed to slice through the darkness of that late November evening, letting the world know that winter's cruel edge had finally arrived. The sky had long since lost any light, leaving behind a bruise-colored expanse that pressed heavily on the rooftops below. Inside the modest, two-story house, 8-year-old Lily Henderson huddled in her small bedroom at the top of the stairs, swaddled in a quilt patterned with faded sunflowers. Earlier that evening, her father, Daniel, had tucked her in and kissed her on the forehead. The routine had been no different from any other night, yet something felt off. There had been a quiet tension beneath her father's usual softness, a tremor in his voice as he said goodnight. Lily had learned over the years to read his moods closely. Since her mother died, Daniel's eyes had carried more secrets than ever before, and Lily had become adept at sensing when one might slip free. Now, as she lay half awake, she wondered what her father was doing. He had left her side quickly tonight, had seemed preoccupied, anxious. She imagined him downstairs in the small living room, maybe pacing from one corner to the other, or standing at the foot of the basement stairs. He often disappeared there after he thought the children were asleep, and while Lily didn't know exactly what went on below the floorboards, she had heard muffled voices, usually just her father, speaking in harsh whispers as if arguing with someone who never answered back. She suspected it had something to do with Ethan, her older brother, who rarely emerged from his basement bedroom these days. Ethan was 13 but had stopped going to school a month ago. He was often tired or sick, and Daniel insisted it was just a phase, a cold that wouldn't quit, something that would get better with rest. But it never seemed to improve, only grow more complicated. Lily caught fragments of conversations Daniel had with doctors over the phone, or saw strange pills in small bottles on the kitchen counter. Nothing was ever explained to her, but she was clever enough to know something serious was going on. Lily's eyelids had started to droop when it happened. A single, shuddering scream from deep below her room. The sound rose through the wooden floors and into her chest, freezing her heart mid-beat. She stiffened, the quilt slipping to her lap, and strained to listen. The scream had been Ethan's voice. She knew it instantly. She had heard him cry out in pain before, but this was different, raw and desperate, like a wounded animal in a trap. She waited, breath snagged in her throat, hoping to hear her father's calming murmur, maybe a reassurance that everything was fine. But the silence that followed was worse than the scream. Pressed down on her, thick and menacing, she slid out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cold wooden floor. Slowly, she crept to the doorway, peering out into the dark hallway. The light in the bathroom nightlight cast a weak halo along the corridor, revealing dust motes spinning in midair. "Daddy," she called softly, voice trembling. "Ethan?" There was no answer. Lily's heart hammered. She took a few timid steps forward, each board beneath her feet creaking. At the top of the stairs, she paused and listened again. Still nothing. The living room lamp was off. She could tell by the absence of that familiar soft glow. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the distant groan of the wind outside. She hesitated. A smart voice in her head warned her not to go down those steps. Whatever had made Ethan scream might still be happening. But another part of her, braver and more loyal, pushed her on. Ethan was her big brother. He used to play hide and seek with her in the backyard and help her arrange her dolls. He would tell her stories when she had nightmares, using a flashlight under the sheets to make funny shapes. She couldn't just leave him alone. Something was terribly wrong. As she reached the bottom step, the musty smell of old wood and damp earth drifted up from the basement door. She could see that door was slightly ajar. Usually, her father kept it firmly shut, locked even, though he never explained why. Lily hovered near the entrance, mustering the courage to push it open. But that was when she heard a low moan coming from below, and what might have been the sound of her father's voice, hurried and low, as if speaking through clenched teeth. Fear pricked the back of her neck. If Daddy was down there, why wouldn't he answer her? Unless he couldn't. Unless something awful had happened to him, too. The possibilities whirled in her mind. A stranger in the house. An accident. Ethan hurt and Daddy unable to help. She reached for the basement door, but her small hand stopped short. Another option flickered in her mind. Calling for help. The phone was on the side table next to the couch in the living room, its handset always just within reach. She had been taught that if ever there was an emergency and an adult wasn't available, she should dial 911. She remembered her mother telling her that years ago before everything changed. Maybe this counted as one of those emergencies? Her hand shaking, she crept to the phone and lifted it from its cradle. The dial tone hummed reassuringly in her ear. She pressed the 3 numbers carefully. 911. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it might be heard on the other end of the line. The call connected, and a calm female voice greeted her. 911. What's your emergency? Lily tried to swallow the lump in her throat, her voice coming out small and breathy. My brother screamed. He's in the basement. My dad, he's not answering me. Something bad is happening. The dispatcher's voice took on a soothing tone. Sweetheart, what's your name? Lily. Lily Henderson, she replied. She could feel tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she tried to be brave. I'm at home. I don't know where Daddy is. Ethan screamed. And now everything is quiet. Okay, Lily, the dispatcher said, measured and calm. Your address should be on my screen. I'm sending the police right now, and they'll be there very soon. Can you stay on the line with me until they arrive? Lily nodded, then realized the dispatcher couldn't see that. Yes, she managed, voice trembling. She could feel her stomach twisting into knots. She clutched the phone tight, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to go back upstairs and hide under her quilt, but she forced herself to stay put. She needed to wait for the police, to be ready to help Ethan and her father if she could. Time stretched out painfully. The dispatcher asked her to describe what had happened, asked if she had seen anyone else in the house. Lily answered as best she could, her words halting and uncertain. She was frightened that if she spoke too loudly or moved too quickly, something would burst out of the basement door. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline, gentle and encouraging, asking Lily about her favorite colors, her hobbies, anything to keep her calm. Lily tried to focus on these questions, but images kept rising in her mind. Ethan tied up, Ethan hurt, Daddy lying on the floor, some stranger hovering over them. She had no idea what could be happening down there, only that it must be something terrible. Then came the flash of blue and red lights outside, flickering through the sheer curtains. Lily heard the approach of car doors slamming and heavy footsteps on the porch. There was a sharp knock at the front door. The dispatcher instructed her to carefully put the phone down and let the officers in. Lily set the handset gently on the table and steeled herself. The police arrived in pairs. The first officer, a tall woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, knelt down in front of Lily to meet her eyes. Her voice was warm but firm. Lily, I'm Officer Torres. We're here to help. Where did you hear your brother scream? Lily pointed a trembling finger toward the basement door. Downstairs, she whispered. His bedroom is down there. My dad, I think he's with him. Officer Torres exchanged a look with her partner, a shorter man with broad shoulders and kind, tired eyes named Officer Sullivan. Okay, Torres said calmly, we're gonna go check on him. Another officer is coming to wait with you. You're safe now. Within moments, another uniformed figure, Officer Martinez, guided Lily toward the kitchen. He offered her a chair and a blanket, and she accepted both, feeling suddenly very small, very cold. She heard Torres and Sullivan moving to the basement door, their footsteps measured and cautious. She peeked around the corner just in time to see them swing the door open wider. A thin beam of light cut down into the darkness below. What happened next was mostly sound. The creak of wooden steps, muffled voices calling Ethan's and Daniel's names. Lily strained to hear any response. The silence dragged on, interrupted by a sudden shout from Officer Sullivan. Stop. Hands in the air. Followed by a scramble of movement. Lily pulled back, heart in her throat. The next minutes were a blur of panic and confusion. Lily heard sharp commands, the frantic scuff of shoes against the basement floor, and then a voice crying, "I'm trying to save him," over and over again. It sounded like Daniel. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Was Daddy in trouble? Why would he be shouting that? She tried to stand, but Officer Martinez gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "Stay here, Lily. It's best if you wait," he said quietly. Soon, Officer Torres emerged, carrying Lily's brother up the steps. Ethan's arms were bound to the chair so tightly that the officer had to awkwardly lift both him and the chair together. Ethan's face, illuminated by the living room light, was terrifyingly pale. His eyes were closed, cheeks wet with tears, and his breath came in short, ragged bursts. Lily's stomach lurched at the sight. Her beloved brother, who once chased her around the backyard making dinosaur noises, now looked more like a broken doll than a boy. Officer Sullivan followed close behind, guiding Daniel up the stairs. Daniel's wrists were cuffed behind his back, and he was crying out, voice cracking, "Please, you don't understand. I had to do it. I had no choice." He looked disheveled, his hair sticking up in all directions, sweat and fear etched into the lines of his face. In that moment, Lily hardly recognized her father. Where was the gentle, steady dad who held her hand on the way to school, who tucked her in at night and sang her lullabies off-key? This man, wild-eyed and panicked, seemed like a stranger. She wanted to rush to him to ask what had happened, but Officer Martinez stayed in front of her, not unkindly but firmly, preventing her from seeing more. Ethan was quickly carried toward the door. More police officers and now paramedics had arrived. Lily craned her neck to see if Ethan was awake, to meet his eyes, to reassure him somehow, but he remained limp, trapped in that chair until the paramedics began to untie the knots. The rope left deep red marks on his wrists, and Lily felt her stomach sink further. Daniel twisted around as best he could, trying to catch sight of Ethan. "Check his medication," he pleaded. "I was trying to help him. You have to believe me." His voice cracked. "Ethan, I'm sorry." But Ethan was unresponsive, and the officers were in no mood to listen. One of them told Daniel to keep quiet. Officer Torres took a moment to kneel beside Lily again, her voice quieter, measured. "Lily, we're going to take your brother and father to the hospital. Okay? Ethan needs a doctor's help right now, and we need to figure out what happened here tonight." She tried to smile reassuringly, but there was worry in her eyes. "Is there anyone else we can call for you, sweetheart? Any family?" Lily's mind raced. No mother. No grandparents, at least none that were close. Her dad had never mentioned anyone who could come over in an emergency. She shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. What's wrong with Ethan?" she asked, voice barely audible. Officer Torres glanced towards the door where paramedics were now loading Ethan onto a gurney. "He's alive," she said softly. "We'll do everything we can to make sure he's okay." Her eyes flickered downward. "For now, we need to take you somewhere safe. A social worker will come and talk to you, explain what's happening." She touched Lily's arm gently. "You did a brave thing tonight, calling for help. That was the right thing to do." But Lily didn't feel brave. She felt confused and terrified. Her father, her kind, loving father, had been arrested right in front of her. Ethan looked like he was on the brink of something terrible. It all felt unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She searched for something familiar and comforting, scanning the cluttered living room, the worn couch, the TV remote on the coffee table, the framed photos on the mantel. There was one of the whole family. Her mom, smiling bright and warm, holding baby Lily in her arms, Daniel standing tall beside them, Ethan grinning proudly at the camera. It felt like a relic of a distant time, before illness and secrecy and screams in the night. A flurry of activity followed. The police and paramedics worked swiftly, moving Ethan to an ambulance outside while another squad car waited for Daniel. Officers asked Lily gentle questions, her age, what she'd heard, if she'd ever seen her dad do anything like this before. She answered as best as she could, voice trembling, sometimes barely managing a nod or a shake of her head. No, she'd never seen anything like this. No, she didn't know why Ethan would scream. No, she didn't think her dad would hurt Ethan. Yes. She was sure she heard him say, "I'm trying to save him." Save him from what? One officer murmured to another, shaking his head. Through the open door, Lily watched them wheel Ethan into the back of the ambulance. One of the paramedics knelt over him, shining a light in his eyes, checking his pulse, monitoring his breathing. Lily wanted to run outside, to be by his side, to hold his hand and tell him she was there. But she was too afraid, too shell-shocked to move. A neighbor or two peeked from their front lawns, drawn by the commotion. Their silhouettes hovered in the pale glow of streetlights, curious and concerned. Lily recognized Mrs. Kowalski from next door, wrapped in a thick robe, her gray hair in rollers, hand over her mouth. Before anyone could speak to her, the officers began to disperse, focusing on the Henderson house on Lily. "Ma'am," Officer Torres called out softly to Mrs. Kowalski. "We'll be placing Lily in temporary care tonight. Please go back inside. Everything's under control." The neighbor nodded reluctantly and disappeared behind her door, leaving Lily with the uniformed strangers. Officer Martinez returned to Lily's side and guided her out of the house. She was wearing only her pajamas, a thin t-shirt and cotton pants. Outside, the cold bit at her skin, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. Martinez fetched a coat from somewhere, placing it gently over her shoulders. It smelled faintly of aftershave and wool. She whispered a thank you. The ambulance pulled away, sirens off, just the faint flash of red lights swirling against the dark trees as it disappeared down the street. Ethan was gone. Lily could hardly breathe. Daniel was led into a squad car, head bowed, tears still shining on his cheeks. Lily caught his eye for a moment, and he managed to mouth something she couldn't quite understand. Maybe he was saying, "I'm sorry," or "I love you." She would never be sure. The engine revved, and the squad car rolled away slowly, leaving Lily standing at the edge of the lawn with two officers and a heavy, suffocating silence. The dispatcher's voice still rang in her ears, calm, reassuring, telling her she did the right thing. But as the cruiser carrying her father turned the corner, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest. She felt tears burn hot behind her eyes, and this time, she let them fall freely. Officer Torres placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," she said quietly. "We'll take you somewhere safe. Someone will explain everything to you. Promise." But to Lily, those words felt hollow. How could anything be okay after this? A few minutes later, Lily was guided into the back seat of another police car. They told her they were taking her to a Child Protective Services facility where she could spend the night. Another officer would accompany her, they said, and soon a social worker would come to talk with her. She tried to picture what that place might look like. Maybe a tidy building with beige walls, a cramped waiting area, kind people who would speak slowly and carefully, not wanting to frighten her more than she already was. As the car pulled away from the curb, Lily pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She looked back at her home, dark and silent now, the front door slightly ajar where officers had come and gone. It no longer looked like the place where she grew up, where laughter once filled the halls and warmth glowed in every window. Instead, it appeared hollow and haunted, as if some terrible spell had been cast over it. And so began a night that would rewrite everything Lily understood about her family. She had only tried to help, to protect Ethan and Daniel, to do what her mother's memory would have told her was right. Yet the world had cracked open beneath her feet, leaving her suspended in a fear and uncertainty that no child should have to face. She hugged the borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders, wishing desperately that she could wake up in her bed and find out this had all been a horrible dream. But as the headlights carved pale tunnels through the empty streets, she knew there was no going back. The silent scream that had torn through her home would echo in her mind for a long time to come. Outside, the wind howled as if in protest, and distant sirens faded into the night. Inside the Henderson home's narrow basement hallway, the air hung thick with a sour mixture of fear and disinfectant. The concrete floor felt cold beneath the officers' boots as they stepped deeper into the shadows, flashlights sweeping across old paint cans, stacks of dusty boxes, and heaps of laundry that had yet to be washed. The beam of Officer Torres's flashlight settled on a doorway at the far end, where a single bare bulb glowed weakly, forming a small circle of dim yellow light on the floor. Ahead of them, Officer Sullivan braced himself. He'd answered many domestic disturbance calls in his career. Often, the signs were all too familiar. Broken furniture, raised voices, a frightened child pressing the phone to her ear. But something about this scene felt off-kilter. It was quieter than it should have been. Aside from a frantic scuffle just moments before, there was a silence so severe it made his skin prickle. Police, Sullivan called, voice firm. Announce yourselves. Nothing. Just the drip of a leaky pipe and the hum of the single bulb. Behind them, upstairs, Lily had been whisked away by another officer. She was safe. Now, it was their job to find out what exactly had brought them here. They moved closer to the open doorway, hearts pounding in time with the flickering overhead light. As they rounded the corner, what they saw was something that would remain etched in their memories for years to come. Ethan Henderson, 13 years old, was lashed to a wooden chair at the center of the basement's main room. Thick rope circled his wrists and ankles, cutting into his pale skin. His head hung at an odd angle, curls of dark hair falling into his eyes, and his cheek bore a red welt, as if he'd struggled violently against his bonds. Beside him knelt Daniel Henderson, a syringe poised in his trembling hand. He froze when the flashlight beams struck him full in the face. His eyes, desperate and hollow, reflected the light with a strange gleam. At that moment, the two officers saw something they could not yet understand. A father's anguish twisted into a shape that looked, to all appearances, like a terrible crime. "Drop it," Torres commanded, her voice echoing. "Police, drop the syringe and step away from the boy." The order hung in the air. Daniel's gaze slid from the officers to Ethan, whose breathing came in soft, ragged gasps. A bead of sweat rolled down Daniel's temple as he slowly loosened his grip on the syringe. It landed with a soft clatter on the concrete floor. He raised his empty hands, palms outward, trembling fingers splayed. Officer Sullivan rushed forward, handcuffs ready. He seized Daniel by the shoulders and pulled him back, away from the bound child. As Daniel was forced face down against the floor, he began babbling, voice muffled and frantic. "You don't understand. Please. He needs this. He's sick. I was trying to save him." Torres ignored him for the moment and knelt beside Ethan, checking the boy's vitals. She found Ethan's pulse, weak but steady, and checked his pupils with a small flashlight. The boy's lashes fluttered as the light swept across his face, and a low moan escaped his lips. "He's alive," Torres said over her shoulder, relief tempered by confusion. She noted the ropes, the dried tear tracks on the boy's cheeks, and the marks on his wrists. It looked like abuse, severe, unthinkable abuse. Daniel's voice continued, begging to be heard. "You have to listen, please. He's sick. I was just—" He choked on a sob when Sullivan tightened the cuffs around his wrists. "You can explain yourself later," Sullivan snapped. He gestured to a fellow officer who had come down after hearing the commotion. "Get the paramedics in here," he said. "We need medics now." The basement door stood ajar behind them, faint murmurs drifting down from the living room. Upstairs, Lily hovered near the kitchen, under watchful guard. She had not been allowed to follow the officers, but the child's terrified gaze seemed to float just behind the walls, her presence haunting every silence. Within minutes, more police and 2 paramedics filed into the cramped basement. The paramedics, one a tall woman with warm brown eyes, the other a compact man with quick hands, moved efficiently around Ethan. They loosened the ropes binding the boy, carefully unthreading them to avoid causing further harm. Ethan stirred weakly, a thin cry escaping his lips. He seemed dazed, as if caught in a fog of pain and confusion. "Ethan," Torres said softly, leaning in, "we're the police. You're safe now." The boy tried to lift his head, failed, and let it loll to one side. His breathing was shallow. The paramedics exchanged worried glances. One of them bent to examine the syringe Daniel had dropped. With gloved fingers, he picked it up by the barrel, careful not to smear any prints. It contained a small amount of cloudy fluid. He handed it to an officer who sealed it in an evidence bag. Whatever it was, it would be tested by the lab. Drugs, poison, something else? No one could say yet. Daniel struggled in Sullivan's grip. "I was trying to help," he pleaded, voice shaking. "He's sick. Please, you have to believe me. I wasn't hurting him." Sullivan's lip curled in disbelief. "You tied him to a chair and tried to stick him with a needle," he said curtly. "Save it for your lawyer." Torres examined the area around the chair. A small folding table stood nearby, littered with medical supplies that didn't belong in a basement. Gauze pads, alcohol wipes, a few empty vials, and a sealed packet of syringes. There were also notebooks filled with scribbled notes and a laptop whose screen glowed with open medical articles, charts, and something that looked suspiciously like black market advertisements. The scene was equal parts desperate hospital ward and makeshift science experiment. Ethan let out a rattling breath as the paramedics prepared him for transport. They checked his vital signs again, placed an oxygen mask gently over his nose and mouth, and muttered quiet words of reassurance. Whatever his father had done or tried to do had left the boy in need of immediate medical attention. Meanwhile, the officers guided Daniel upstairs. He stumbled on the steps, turning his head in anguish as he called down, "Ethan! Ethan! I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I was trying to make it stop. I was only trying to help." But no one answered him, and an officer tugged him forward, away from the basement's secrets and into the harsh light of the living room, where others waited to escort him to a patrol car. When Daniel emerged from the basement, his eyes fell on Lily, who stood near the kitchen doorway, clinging to the coat Officer Martinez had placed over her shoulders. The child's face, streaked with dried tears, contorted when she saw her father in handcuffs. "Daddy," she whimpered. Daniel froze, his eyes pleading. "Lily, sweetheart," he began, voice trembling, but Sullivan cut him off, escorting him out the front door. Lily reached out as if trying to grasp something that was no longer there, fingers curling around empty air. She felt the room tilt beneath her feet, everything spinning into an awful blur. Officer Torres came up the stairs slowly, her boots heavy on the steps. She looked at Lily with a gentle sympathy that made the girl's chest tighten. "Sweetheart," Torres said quietly, "your brother is hurt. We're taking him to the hospital. You're going to be safe, I promise. Do you understand?" Lily nodded numbly. She could feel the weight of what she had done crashing down on her shoulders. She had called 911 to save Ethan, to help her father. But now her father was gone, taken away, and Ethan had been tied to a chair. It made no sense. Her head spun with questions she was too afraid to ask. Outside, the paramedics eased Ethan onto a gurney. His eyes flickered open for a split second under the bright porch light, and he let out a small, pained groan. They loaded him into the waiting ambulance, shutting the doors with a heavy thud. Red and blue lights swirled on the street, painting the quiet suburban homes with eerie colors. By now, a few neighbors had ventured out, peering from their driveways or windows, trying to discern the nature of the tragedy unfolding in their midst. In the chilly November air, Lily shivered. Without a word, Torres guided her toward a second police cruiser. "We need to take you somewhere safe tonight," she explained. "A place where you can rest and talk to someone. Do you have any relatives nearby?" Lily shook her head. She tried to summon courage, but her voice emerged thin. "Is Ethan going to be okay?" The officer hesitated, pressing her lips together. She couldn't promise that Ethan would be fine, not without the facts. "He's alive," she said at last carefully. "The doctors will do everything they can. And my dad." Lily's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Why was he doing that to Ethan?" Torres softened her tone as much as possible. "Your father is in custody," she said gently. "We need to figure out what happened, Lily. Sometimes grown-ups make dangerous choices that they think will help, but it's not the right way." The explanation felt weak, inadequate, What comfort could she offer to a child who had just witnessed such a scene? At the curb, Daniel was being placed into the backseat of a patrol car. He was frantic, trying to twist around to make eye contact with the officers, to find someone who would believe him. "Please just listen," he begged. "He has a condition, he's not safe without the medication." "I had no choice." Officer Sullivan shut the door, muffling Daniel's voice. But his words lingered in the air. A condition? Medication? To Sullivan's experienced mind, it sounded like a feeble excuse, a desperate attempt to justify tying a child to a chair and injecting him with who knows what. Yet the sincerity in Daniel's voice, the tears glistening on his cheeks, planted a tiny seed of doubt. He pushed the thought aside. That wasn't his job. He had done what he must. Secured the suspect, protected the child. The rest would be up to detectives, doctors, and judges. Back inside, Lily was taken gently by the hand and led out of the house. She moved as if in a trance, each step heavier than the last. She glanced over her shoulder one final time at the small living room, the abandoned television remote on the coffee table, the family photographs on the mantel. Proof that once there had been a normal life here. Now it felt like a hollow shell, a stage set for a tragedy she didn't understand. The drive to the Children's Protective Services Center was quiet. Lily sat in the back seat of a police cruiser, her eyes fixed on the dark streets rushing by. She thought of Ethan, recalling brighter days. Playing tag in the yard, eating pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, whispering stories under a blanket fort. She wanted to believe that the Ethan she knew was still in there, somewhere, beneath the pain and confusion. She wanted to believe that her dad, who had always done his best, had not suddenly become a monster. When they arrived, a social worker was waiting in the lobby. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a soothing voice. She knelt down to Lily's level, introduced herself as Ms. Palmer, and offered a cup of hot chocolate. Lily took it reluctantly, grateful for the warmth in her hands. She sipped slowly, letting the sugary sweetness coat her tongue, but it did nothing to settle the swarm of worries in her stomach. Ms. Palmer asked gentle, open-ended questions. Did Lily know what Ethan's medical condition was? Had her dad ever talked about giving Ethan shots before? Lily shook her head, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She had known Ethan was sick, but she didn't know the details, only that he was always tired, and sometimes he cried out in pain, and their father had become increasingly withdrawn and anxious. But tying him up? Injecting him? Lily's mind circled these images like a moth around a flame, unable to process their meaning. Outside the Protective Services building, night deepened. The wind still whipped at the eaves, and a half-moon glowed faintly behind drifting clouds. In a small interrogation room back at the police station, Daniel Henderson sat alone, head in hands, waiting for someone to listen. Once a proud father, he now looked like a man who had tried everything and lost. He whispered to himself, replaying the scene over and over. Ethan's seizures, the doctor's rejections, the cost of medication, and the final desperate choice he had made in that cramped basement. He remembered how Ethan had begged him to make the pain stop, how Lily had slept upstairs, unaware, while Daniel weighed his impossible options. He remembered making phone calls to old colleagues, searching the internet late into the night, stumbling onto a chat room where someone claimed they had an experimental formula that could help. He'd had the package delivered in secret, telling himself he could handle it, that this was better than watching his son worsen with no intervention at all. But the boy had struggled, terrified of the needle, and Daniel had panicked. Rope was the last resort. He was never going to hurt Ethan, just restrain him long enough to administer the medication. He thought he was doing what a good father would do, anything to save his child. The detectives who would soon enter that room had a different perspective. The evidence pointed to child abuse, and they would press him hard. Daniel knew this, braced himself for it. But he also knew the truth, and he hoped that somewhere, amidst the chaos and confusion, the truth could be heard. He pictured Lily's face, her bright, curious eyes before they grew clouded by this night's events. He wanted to explain it all to her, to show her that he loved Ethan more than his own life, that he'd never cause him harm intentionally. In the hospital where Ethan was rushed, Doctors and nurses worked swiftly under fluorescent lights. They noted his symptoms, checked for injection marks, ran blood tests to identify what substance Daniel had tried to administer. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, moaning softly when the pain peaked. Ethan's chart was thin, incomplete. It mentioned doctor visits that had grown sparse in recent months, as if the family had retreated from the healthcare system. Strange, but not unheard of. Sometimes families fell off the grid due to money, insurance troubles, or fear of bad news. The staff did their best with what they had, stabilizing Ethan's vital signs, ensuring he was not in immediate danger. By the time dawn approached, the pieces of the night's events had begun to settle, though not yet into a coherent whole. The police had what appeared to be a straightforward case. A father caught in the act of harming his child. The Children's Protective Services had 2 siblings separated from their sole caregiver. The hospital had a young patient with injuries that suggested abuse, but perhaps something else as well. And Lily, now resting fitfully in a temporary foster placement, had more questions than answers, trapped in her own mind with images no child should carry. Back on Brookhaven's quiet street, the Henderson home stood silent, marked by a strip of police tape over the front door. Inside, the basement remained as they had found it, except for the footprints and discarded gloves left behind by the authorities. A desk lamp still glowed beside a half-finished medical article on the laptop screen. The rope that once bound Ethan lay coiled on the floor, the syringe long since taken as evidence. It was a crime scene now, but also a snapshot of desperation, a museum of broken dreams and misguided decisions. By the time the early light of day began to push back the darkness, each participant in this grim tableau, Lily, Ethan, Daniel, the police, the social workers, the doctors, had been set onto a path none of them had chosen. The moment in the basement would define the days and weeks to come, as everyone struggled to understand how a father's love could look so disturbingly like a crime. It was clear that nothing would ever be the same for the Henderson family. The full truth, still hidden in shadows, would take time and compassion to emerge. But for now, all that anyone outside could see was a disturbing discovery that would leave its mark on all involved. Her pen against a yellow legal pad, her gaze drifted over Daniel Henderson, who sat slumped in a steel chair bolted to the floor. The overhead lighting was harsh, illuminating the sweat on his brow, the shadows under his eyes, and every tense muscle along his jawline. She had interviewed many suspects over the years, some remorseless, some frantic. But Daniel didn't fit neatly into any category. His posture conveyed a mixture of dread and grief, as though he were sitting vigil at a hospital bed rather than facing possible felony charges. "Mr. Henderson," Monroe began, keeping her tone even, "I need you to explain what happened in that basement. Help me understand why we found your son tied to a chair and you holding a syringe. If there's any truth that can mitigate what we saw, now is the time." Daniel's eyes were red-rimmed, as if he'd spent the night fighting back tears. He took a shaky breath and laced his fingers together so tightly that his knuckles went white. "I know what it must look like," he said, voice cracking, "but I wasn't hurting him. You have to believe me. He's sick. Ethan's been sick for almost a year. He was having these outbursts, seizures, pain that made him scream. The doctors, they said it was some rare neurological condition, something they couldn't quite pin down. We tried medication after medication. Nothing worked." He blinked hard, his throat bobbing. His behavior got worse. "I lost my job because I had to stay home to care for him. We ran through our savings, maxed out insurance. We couldn't afford the specialists or experimental treatments they recommended." Monroe took notes, nodding thoughtfully. She had heard a version of this story before. Families pushed to the brink by medical bills, parents scrambling to find cures for impossible illnesses. But never had she encountered such a desperate measure. A father attempting a back-alley medical procedure on his own child in a makeshift clinic below their living room. "And the syringe?" she asked quietly, guiding him back to the central point. "What was in it?" Daniel swallowed. "A drug I bought online. A supposed experimental treatment someone claimed worked on conditions like Ethan's. I don't even know if it was real. But I had run out of options." His gaze dropped to his lap. Ethan was having a violent seizure that night. He'd been thrashing and screaming. I tried talking him down, holding him, but he was hurting himself, hitting his head. I panicked. His voice wavered. I tied him to the chair for his own safety, so he wouldn't bite his tongue or crack his skull on the floor. And I thought, if I give him this injection, maybe it'll stop. Maybe he'll be okay again. Monroe observed him, searching for signs of deception. A shift in posture, a quiver in his voice that didn't match his words. Instead, she saw only heartbreak. Still, she remained cautious. Did you ever consider calling an ambulance or reaching out to his doctors? His eyes flashed with despair. We tried everything. They told us we needed extensive testing that would cost thousands. We were on a wait list for a specialist months away. In the meantime, Ethan's symptoms were getting worse. He begged me, Detective. Daniel's voice broke. He begged me to make the pain stop. Monroe sighed softly, rubbing the bridge of her nose. This was not a typical child abuse narrative. She would need verification, of course, medical records, statements from doctors, social workers. For now, though, Daniel's story planted a seed of doubt in the picture the crime scene had painted. While Daniel's interrogation continued, Detective Brian Karloff was stationed in a cramped records room down the hall, sifting through Ethan's medical files. Hospitals, pediatricians, neurologists, Karloff pieced together a timeline of frantic medical appointments, prescriptions that changed every few weeks, inconclusive MRI scans, and referrals that led nowhere. He found phone transcripts between Daniel and various healthcare agencies, pleas for financial assistance, insurance claim rejections. Each page told a story of a family drowning under the weight of a mysterious illness. He paused at a letter from a clinic specializing in rare neurological disorders. It acknowledged Ethan's condition, a degenerative neural anomaly, and expressed regret that the family's insurance wouldn't cover the new experimental therapy. The cost, listed at the bottom, was staggering. Karloff frowned. He'd been a detective long enough to know that desperation could drive people to terrible ends. But was Daniel's crime truly born of desperation rather than cruelty? Karloff picked up his phone and called the clinic's main line. After a wait that seemed interminable, a weary administrator confirmed Ethan's partial diagnosis and their attempts to secure funding for treatment. The father called frequently, the administrator said. He sounded desperate. We told him about a clinical trial, but it was out of state months away. He cried on the phone, Detective. I remember it because it broke my heart to hear a father so lost. Hanging up, Karloff rubbed his stubbled jaw. Daniel's story was gaining credibility. This wasn't some sadistic parent. If anything, he might have been a man cornered by a failing system, trying to save his son the only way he knew how. At the hospital, Ethan lay in a private room, hooked up to monitors that tracked his every breath and heartbeat. Nurses moved quietly around him, adjusting for drips and checking his vitals. A pediatric neurologist, Dr. Marion Klein, hovered at the bedside, studying the charts and the fresh test results that had come in overnight. Lily, accompanied by a social worker, stood at the edge of the room, pressing her fingertips to the glass pane of the door. She wasn't allowed inside yet, but she could see Ethan's pale face on the pillow. He looked peaceful now, nothing like the screaming figure she'd imagined in the basement. She wanted to run in, hold his hand, whisper that she was sorry, even though she wasn't sure for what. She had tried to help, calling 911 was supposed to help. The social worker, Ms. Palmer, placed a comforting hand on Lily's shoulder. He's stable, Ms. Palmer said softly. They're running more tests to understand what's happening to him. Lily nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. The last 24 hours had torn her world apart, leaving her adrift in confusion and worry. From down the hallway, Dr. Klein approached them after examining Ethan's new charts. She knelt to Lily's eye level and said, Your brother is very brave, and we're doing everything we can to help him. We've identified a rare neurological condition, something that causes him severe pain and violent seizures. It's complicated, but now that we know more, we can try proper treatments. Ms. Palmer frowned. Doctor, we've heard that the father tried some sort of unapproved medication. Could that have made things worse? Dr. Klein exhaled. It's possible. We found traces of an unknown compound in Ethan's blood. We're analyzing it. If it's what I suspect, one of those black market experimental drugs, it might have been dangerous. But I can't say he intended to harm Ethan. Desperate families sometimes turn to extreme measures. Our healthcare system doesn't always make it easy to get proper help. Her voice carried a note of sympathy that Lily clung to, desperate for any reassurance that her father wasn't a monster. Later that afternoon, Detective Monroe stepped outside to make a phone call. Standing near the station's parking lot, she squinted at the pale winter sun. On the other end of the line was Karloff, updating her on what he'd found. I've confirmed the father's story with medical records and the clinic. Ethan's condition is real, and it's serious, Karloff said. Daniel tried for months to get help. He was denied at every turn. Monroe closed her eyes briefly. He still tied his son to a chair, she said, voice quiet. But I understand now. He must have been terrified. Maybe he really thought this was his last hope. Karloff's voice crackled. What's the DA going to say? Child endangerment is still a crime. No matter the reason. I know, Monroe sighed. But intent matters. We might be looking at a case where a father's desperate act could be seen in a different light. Not as malice, but as a tragic attempt to save his child. We should talk to the DA. See if we can charge him with something less severe than felony abuse. As she hung up, Monroe looked over at a group of kids across the street, bundled in coats, playing tag in the schoolyard. She imagined Ethan and Lily once lived a life that simple, before illness took root, before desperation twisted love into something unrecognizable. A few hours later, a meeting took place in a small conference room at the station. Present were Detective Monroe, Detective Karloff, a representative from Child Protective Services, and Assistant District Attorney Janelle Carter. They spread out the files, Ethan's medical records, the statement from Daniel, the forensics report on the syringe. The ADA studied them quietly. We have a father who, from all accounts, never showed signs of abuse prior to this, Carter said, tapping a manicured nail on the table. No calls to CPS. No injuries to the children recorded by pediatricians before this. The daughter seems well cared for, academically stable, no bruises or behavioral red flags. Monroe nodded. Yes, and it appears that this episode was triggered by a severe seizure. The father panicked, but he restrained his child and tried to inject him with an illicit drug, Carter said, not unkindly but firmly. He broke the law. He put his child in grave danger. Karloff stepped in. He did. But what if we look at motive and circumstances? This was not a case of sadistic harm. It was a misguided attempt at treatment, fueled by desperation and lack of resources. The CPS representative, a measured woman named Alvarez, chimed in. If we press the harshest charges, we separate this family indefinitely. Lily's already traumatized. Ethan is sick, and he needs stability. Perhaps we consider a plea deal, child endangerment, yes, but focus on mandatory counseling, supervised visitation, and ensuring Ethan gets into a proper medical program. Carter weighed their arguments. I can recommend lesser charges, she said at last. Still a crime, but with the possibility of leniency. Ultimately, the judge will decide. The main thing is that Ethan gets proper care. And Lily, she needs reassurance. As they reached a tentative consensus, there was a collective sense of relief in the room. Not relief that laws had been broken, but relief that a more nuanced understanding had come to light. This was not a villain they were dealing with, but a father trapped by circumstance. In the hospital, Lily was finally allowed to sit by Ethan's bedside. He was awake, though tired and groggy. She held his hand carefully, her tiny fingers wrapped around his pale wrist. They said you're sick, she whispered, her voice catching. They said Daddy was trying to help, but I didn't understand. I'm sorry I called the police. I thought something bad was happening. Ethan's eyes opened slowly, and he managed a faint, lopsided smile. You did what you thought was right, he rasped. The sound of his own voice seemed to startle him. It had been so long since they'd spoken like this, without pain overshadowing everything. I'm glad you're here. Dr. Klein stepped in to update them. We've arranged for Ethan to be evaluated by a specialist. With proper treatment, real treatment, there's a good chance we can manage his condition. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Lily looked from the doctor to her brother, tears shining in her eyes. A wave of relief and hope washed over her. She remembered her father's words, "I'm trying to save him," and suddenly, they didn't feel like lies or excuses. They felt like the frantic cry of a father in over his head. Back at the station, Daniel Henderson sat in a cell awaiting formal charges. He worried about Ethan, about Lily, about what the future held. He had failed, in a sense. He had chosen a desperate, dangerous path. Yet, he hoped that maybe now people would understand. Maybe Ethan would get the care he needed, and Lily would know that he never meant to scare her. Monroe approached the cell bars, meeting Daniel's eyes. "We've learned about Ethan's condition," she said softly. "We know you tried to get help. The DA is considering lesser charges. You'll likely need to plead guilty to something, Mr. Henderson. But you might avoid prison if you cooperate and follow the court's orders." Daniel's shoulders sagged in a mixture of grief and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for understanding." He leaned his head against the cool metal bars, imagining Ethan's small hand in his, Lily's steady presence. If he could turn back time, he would have chosen differently, called for medical help again, begged louder, sought community support. But the past was fixed. All he could do now was hope for a future where his children were safe, healed, and no longer burdened by his mistakes. Outside, the afternoon sun drifted lower, casting long shadows across the streets of Brookhaven. The truth, once hidden under the veneer of a brutal scene, had begun to emerge. A family strained to the breaking point by illness and lack of resources. A father's desperate gamble for his son's life. Though the road ahead would be steep and uncertain, at least now the Henderson family's story could be told for what it truly was. A tragedy not of cruelty, but of desperation, and within that desperation, a seed of hope that things might finally change. In the sterile hush of the hospital hallway, Lily sat perched on a plastic chair too large for her small frame, her feet dangling above the tiled floor. Everything felt off balance. Her family had splintered overnight and now existed in distant, fragmented places she couldn't easily reach. Ethan lay behind a closed door a few yards away, resting under blankets and subdued lights, doctors and nurses tiptoeing in and out. Her father Daniel was not here at all, and Lily had no idea when, if ever, he would return. She knew only that he would face charges and that the police believed he had endangered Ethan. The truth that had emerged, that he'd acted out of desperation, gave little comfort now. He was gone. Ethan was fragile, and she was caught in the currents of other people's decisions, too young to steer her own ship. Ms. Palmer, the social worker who had been assigned to Lily's case, approached softly. She carried a small brown bag with a sandwich and an apple, but Lily shook her head when offered food, her appetite lost amid the whirl of anxious thoughts. Ms. Palmer didn't press. Instead, she lowered herself onto the chair beside Lily, smoothing her gray skirt. "They're examining Ethan," she said quietly. "They believe the experimental treatment the doctors will start next week might help stabilize his condition. He's on proper medication now, monitored closely. They're doing all they can." Lily pressed her lips together, wanting to believe it. In the back of her mind, she remembered the evenings when Ethan could still smile and laugh. He used to play board games with her on rainy afternoons. She wanted that brother back. "Is Daddy coming?" she finally asked, voice thin. Miss Palmer reached for Lily's hand, careful and gentle. "Your father can't come right now. The court will decide when and how he can see you and Ethan again. He made some dangerous choices, Lily, and the judge will need to hear his case. You'll be with a foster family for a little while, just until we figure everything out. It won't be forever." Lily swallowed hard. She tried to imagine living with strangers, sleeping in a bed that wasn't hers. She tried to picture dinner at a table with people she didn't know. The thought unsettled her, but what choice did she have? Her home in Brookhaven felt like a place of ghosts and memories, not the warm refuge it once was. A muffled chime signaled the end of visiting hours for non-family members, but Lily was considered family to Ethan, so she was allowed brief moments by his bedside. He had stirred a bit that morning, opened his eyes, and whispered her name. That whisper had haunted her all day, a fragile connection between siblings drifting in a world that suddenly seemed uncaring. "Can I see him again?" Lily asked, voice small. Ms. Palmer hesitated, then nodded. Together they approached Ethan's room. A nurse at the threshold nodded approval, and Lily stepped inside, inhaling the scent of antiseptic and latex gloves. Ethan's eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling in measured rhythms. Lily took his hand in hers, feeling the slight chill of his skin. "I'm sorry," she murmured, unsure what else to say. "Sorry for calling the police. Sorry for not understanding what Dad had been trying to do. Sorry for the whole tangled mess they were in." Ethan didn't respond, but his eyelids fluttered, and Lily clung to that small sign of life and awareness. Elsewhere, at the Brookhaven Police Department, Daniel Henderson sat in a small meeting room with his court-appointed attorney, a young man named Joshua Fields who wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried a perpetual frown of concentration. Stacks of paperwork littered the table. Medical records, transcripts of Daniel's frantic calls to insurance companies, photos of the basement scene, and a preliminary deal offered by the prosecutor's office. The charges had been reduced, thanks in part to the detective's thorough investigation and the DA's recognition of Daniel's desperate motives. But there would still be consequences. "Endangering the welfare of a child," Joshua said, tapping the papers. "This is the lesser charge they've settled on. It's not good, Daniel, but it's better than facing felony abuse charges. If you plead guilty, you might get probation, mandatory counseling, and supervised visitation with Ethan and Lily. It will be up to a judge, but that's the likely scenario." Daniel's face, drawn and haunted, sagged with relief and sorrow. "I'll plead guilty," he said. "I can't drag this out. I need them to know I accept responsibility. I just want Ethan to get better." His voice cracked. "And Lily, I need her to know I'm not a monster." Joshua nodded sympathetically. "I understand. It's going to be hard. But if we show that you're willing to do anything to support Ethan's proper care now, and that you realize your mistake, the judge may be lenient." Daniel closed his eyes, remembering the basement. The dim light, Ethan's tear-streaked face, the weight of the syringe in his hand. He never intended harm, only a last-ditch rescue attempt. But love twisted into desperation can look like cruelty. He had learned that the hard way. Within the Brookhaven community, news of the Henderson case spread quickly. Neighbors who once smiled politely at Daniel in the driveway were now glued to local news segments. At first, the story sounded simple. A father abusing his son in a basement. Outrage soared. But when the fuller truth emerged, Ethan's illness, the crippling medical costs, the father's frantic attempts to secure treatment, outrage mingled with sympathy. Mrs. Kowalski next door had always considered Daniel a kind man, albeit quiet since his wife's passing. She remembered how he helped shovel her driveway last winter when her back went out. When reporters asked her for a comment, she shook her head, tears in her eyes. "He's a good man who did a terrible thing out of fear and hopelessness. This could happen to any of us. God forbid we're pushed that far." Her words found their way into a local newspaper's editorial column, sparking debate. Some readers scoffed, calling for harsh punishment, while others argued that the system itself was to blame. A healthcare web so tangled and expensive that a decent father felt cornered into madness. A small group of community members, moved by compassion, organized a fundraiser for Ethan's medical care. They set it up online, spreading the link through social media. Donations trickled in, $10 here, $20 there, accompanied by messages of solidarity. "No family should have to break the law to save their child," wrote one donor. "We stand with Ethan," said another. Brookhaven wasn't a wealthy town, but it had heart, and that heart now beat a little louder, trying to make amends for a broken system. Meanwhile, Child Protective Services arranged for Lily to stay temporarily with a foster family named the Browns. They were an older couple, empty nesters with grown children. Their home, just a few blocks away from the Henderson house, was warm and orderly, a place of crocheted blankets and family photographs. Mr. Brown was a retired teacher with a gentle laugh, and Mrs. Brown baked cookies that smelled like a distant memory of comfort. On Lily's first night there, She lay awake in a strange bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling by some previous foster child. She wondered if Ethan was sleeping, if her father was okay, if her mother, gone all these years, was somehow watching over them all. In the morning, over a breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, Mrs. Brown said softly, "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry you've been through such a scare." Lily kept her eyes on her plate, unsure what to say. "Your brother will get better, Lily. The doctors are working on it," Mrs. Brown continued. "And I know your father loves you both very much, even if he made a big mistake." Lily glanced up, surprised by the gentle understanding in Mrs. Brown's voice. She nodded, tears gathering. She had worried everyone would paint her father as a villain, that she'd have to defend him. But here, at least, she found empathy. Mr. Brown reached across the table and patted Lily's hand once, a quiet gesture of comfort, then went back to buttering his toast. They did not press her to talk more than she was ready to. For that, Lily was grateful. In a small conference room at the hospital, Dr. Marion Klein met with a group of specialists who had studied Ethan's condition. The progress in diagnostics had been swift once Ethan was removed from the chaotic environment of home treatments and placed under proper medical supervision. The team identified a specific neurological disorder, a degenerative nerve condition that inflamed certain parts of the brain, causing extreme pain, seizures, and unpredictable behavior. It was rare and difficult, but not entirely without hope. "There's a new clinical trial in Michigan," Dr. Klein explained to the social worker and a hospital administrator. "It's not a guaranteed cure, but initial results are promising. If we can get Ethan approved for that trial, he might have a chance at a more stable life." The administrator frowned, flipping through insurance documents. "We're going to need funding," he said. "The family's insurance is minimal, and given the father's legal troubles, this might be complicated." Ms. Palmer, the social worker, exhaled. "Complicated or not, we owe it to this child to try. There's a growing community response, donations, media attention. Maybe we can leverage that." It was a small ray of light, a potential path forward that might justify Daniel's desperate last act, not in legal terms, but in moral ones. If Ethan could be helped, maybe everyone could begin to heal. Across town at the courthouse, the preliminary hearing for Daniel took place. The courtroom was modest, wooden benches worn smooth by decades of cases big and small. Daniel, wearing a second-hand suit provided by a local charity organization, stood beside Joshua Fields. The prosecutor presented the reduced charges and reiterated that Daniel's actions placed Ethan in harm's way. But there was no venom in her tone, no attempt to paint Daniel as a monster. It was as if all parties recognized the tragedy underlying the crime. Daniel pleaded guilty. He gave a brief statement, voice trembling, eyes cast downward. "I should never have done what I did," he said. "I was afraid and desperate, but I know that doesn't make it right. I love my son more than anything. I accept whatever punishment you deem fit." Tears glistened at the corners of his eyes. "I just want him safe and healthy." The judge, a stern-looking woman with kind eyes, nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Henderson. I will review the materials submitted, including the medical records and statements from Child Protective Services. For now, you remain in custody until sentencing, which I will schedule soon. In the meantime, I advise you to cooperate fully with all evaluations." As Daniel was led away, he tried to picture Ethan's face and Lily's smile. He would accept any burden if it meant they could have a future free of this nightmare. Outside the courthouse, a small group of neighbors and concerned citizens had gathered. They talked quietly, some holding signs that said, "Support healthcare reform," or "Justice for Ethan." A few reporters hovered on the edges, sensing a human interest story that might spark wider conversations. One journalist managed to interview Ms. Palmer. "What does this case say about our system?" he asked. Ms. Palmer chose her words carefully. "It shows that when families don't have access to proper medical care and support, they can be driven to extreme measures. This doesn't excuse wrongdoing, but it provides context. We need better safety nets, better mental health resources, and affordable treatment options so no one feels forced into such desperate actions." The journalist nodded, scribbling in his notebook. It was a narrative that might resonate beyond Brookhaven, a call to action in a world where too many people fell through the cracks. As the days turned into a week, subtle shifts occurred. Lily attended sessions with a therapist arranged by CPS, a gentlewoman who used colored markers and drawing exercises to help Lily express her feelings. Lily drew pictures of her old house, before Ethan got sick, with bright green grass and yellow sunlight. She drew Ethan and herself playing tag, her father reading a story to them. Slowly, she opened up about her fears and confusion. The therapist praised her courage and reassured her that none of this was her fault. At the hospital, Ethan's condition stabilized enough for him to have short, quiet conversations with the medical team and Ms. Palmer. When Lily visited, he squeezed her hand and told her not to cry. "It's okay, Lily," he said, voice still soft, but clearer now. "We're going to be okay." That's what Mom would say, right? Mentioning their mother brought a bittersweet ache, but it also reminded them they had once been a family that overcame hardships together. The Browns, Lily's foster parents, made arrangements so that Lily could do her homework at a small desk in their guest room. They made sure she had her favorite snacks and reassured her that she could visit Ethan regularly. While Lily missed her father terribly, there was a warmth in the Brown household that comforted her. They reminded her that kindness still existed in the world, and she clung to that. Public discourse about the case swelled. A local newspaper published an editorial titled, "When Desperation Leads to Tragedy," calling for healthcare reforms and more robust social safety nets. Letters to the editor poured in, some sympathetic, others outraged. A few local politicians commented vaguely, promising to look into the healthcare issues. The uproar wouldn't rewrite laws overnight, but it brought attention to a chronic problem. Families slipping through the cracks of an expensive, complicated system, until desperation erupted into crisis. In the quiet halls of City Hall, a councilman looked over the fundraiser page that had gathered a modest sum for Ethan's care. He considered proposing a community fund for families in medical emergencies, a modest local measure that might prevent another Henderson case. Maybe this tragedy could become a catalyst for good. As Ethan's test results came back, Dr. Klein approached Ms. Palmer with news. "He's a candidate for the Michigan trial. We need consent from a legal guardian, of course." Ms. Palmer folded her hands. "For now, CPS is the legal guardian. I'll start the paperwork. We'll try to coordinate with the court as well. We can't let bureaucracy stand in the way of his care." News of the upcoming trial treatment filtered back to Daniel through his attorney. Hearing that Ethan might receive the help he so desperately needed flooded Daniel with a strange mixture of joy and regret. Joy that his son could get better. Regret that he hadn't found a lawful way to reach this point sooner. Maybe if he had asked the community for help earlier, or reached out to family, though there was no one left on his side except a few distant cousins, or pursued every last charitable resource, he might not have ended up in that basement with a syringe and a nightmare unfolding around him. Still, it was no use dwelling on what-ifs. The wheels were turning now. The judge would soon sentence him, and he would accept whatever terms were given. With luck and good behavior, maybe he could re-enter his children's lives in a structured, supervised way. Maybe one day Ethan would run and laugh again in their backyard, and Lily would see that her father, flawed as he was, had never stopped loving them. Under the fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor, Lily held Miss Palmer's hand as they visited Ethan for what felt like the 100th time. But each visit now carried a hint of optimism. Ethan was awake and alert. He smiled at Lily when she entered, and she set a small card on his bedside table. A drawing of the two of them under a big sun, holding hands. Ethan looked at it for a long moment. Miss Palmer explained to Ethan that he might soon travel to Michigan for special treatment. "It's a big step," she said. "We'll help arrange everything. Your sister can visit, and we'll make sure you're supported." Ethan nodded solemnly, then looked at Lily. "We have to be strong, okay?" he said. "Dad isn't here, but I know he cares. He did something really wrong, but he tried." He searched her face, and Lily nodded, tears in her eyes. They both knew life would never be the same, but maybe they could build something new from the wreckage. Outside, evening shadows lengthened, and the world kept spinning. The Hendersons' crisis had exposed weaknesses and stirred compassion. It had forced everyone involved, police, social services, doctors, neighbors, to reconsider their assumptions. And though the emotional wounds would run deep and healing would not come easily, the first steps had been taken. In the end, it was Lily's quiet resolve, Ethan's resilience, and Daniel's remorse that would guide them forward. The family, though fractured, was not beyond repair. They would have to rebuild carefully, slowly, and with help from those who understood that love and desperation are often tangled threads, needing patience and understanding to tease apart. As the night sky settled over Brookhaven, that fragile hope glimmered like a distant star, faint but still shining. In the softness of an early spring morning, the hospital's corridors were unusually quiet. Lily sat beside Ethan's bed, her small hand clasped around his. Outside the window, a pale sun hovered low on the horizon, painting everything in gentle hues of gold and rose. The long winter of pain and confusion was beginning to thaw. Ethan looked better, still fragile, but more alive than Lily remembered in a long time. The experimental treatment, combined with proper medication and specialist care, had eased the worst of his seizures. He moved carefully, still adjusting to the way his body now felt, but he offered Lily a tired grin that warmed her heart. A nurse had left a coloring book on his tray table, and Lily had been helping him fill in the outlines of forest animals with bright markers. Each small accomplishment, a page finished, a quiet night's sleep, felt like a victory. The last few weeks had changed all their lives. Their father, Daniel, had pleaded guilty to lesser charges, and, after a painful court hearing, had avoided jail time. Instead, he faced a period of probation, mandatory counseling, and the loss of custody, at least for now. He accepted it without complaint. In his final statement before the judge, he had spoken honestly of his remorse and love for his children. The judge, moved by the complicated tragedy of it all, offered a glimmer of leniency. If Daniel followed every condition, if he proved himself stable and responsible, the door to supervised visitation would open. For now, Lily remained in foster care with the Browns, who treated her kindly, respecting her need to visit Ethan at the hospital each day. Ms. Palmer, the social worker, orchestrated these visits, ensuring Lily could spend time with her brother, strengthening their bond. Next week, Ethan would be transferred to Michigan for the clinical trial. Lily would stay behind, attending school, therapy sessions, and working toward emotional healing. It would be hard to be apart, but they both understood it might be the key to Ethan's future health. On a small table in the corner of the room, an arrangement of flowers, donations from neighbors and well-wishers, brought color and life to the sterile space. Lily had been amazed at how many people cared. Strangers had donated funds to help with Ethan's upcoming treatment. Local businesses had organized bake sales and community dinners to raise money and awareness. It seemed that everyone who had first condemned Daniel quickly learned the fuller truth, that this was a family failed by a broken system. Compassion had replaced outrage. Ethan's eyelids drooped. He had less pain now, but the medication made him drowsy. Lily squeezed his hand and whispered, "It's okay if you sleep. I'll be here." He nodded, allowing himself to drift off. She watched him quietly, her chest aching with both worry and hope. On the bedside table sat a photograph, one that Miss Palmer had retrieved from the Henderson home. It showed the family in happier times. Her mother still alive, holding Lily as a toddler, Daniel beside them, and Ethan grinning with all the light-hearted joy of a young boy. Lily had placed the picture there for Ethan to see, to remind them both that, once upon a time, they had been whole. Perhaps not everything could be reclaimed, but something new could be built. A soft knock at the door announced Miss Palmer's arrival. She stepped inside, smiling gently. "How's he doing?" she asked in a hushed voice. "Better," Lily said. "He's sleeping." She glanced at Miss Palmer, noting the concern and kindness in her face. Over the past weeks, Lily had learned to trust the social worker. Miss Palmer never lied to her, never made promises she couldn't keep. She had explained everything carefully. Why Lily had to stay with the Browns, how long it might be before Daniel could have supervised visits, and what treatments Ethan would need. Understanding the situation didn't make it hurt less, but it helped Lily see that none of this was her fault. In a quiet conversation with Miss Palmer, Lily had confessed her guilt, worrying that calling 911 might have made things worse. Miss Palmer reassured her that calling was brave, that without her call, Ethan might never have received the proper care. Lily reached out and took Miss Palmer's hand. "Will I get to talk to Dad soon?" she asked, voice tremulous. Miss Palmer nodded. "In time, yes. Not right away, but eventually you'll have a chance, maybe with a counselor present. He's working through his own healing, Lily. But he loves you, and he's agreed to do whatever it takes to be a part of your lives again." Tears gathered at the corners of Lily's eyes. She felt the weight of relief and sadness mingled together. I want us to be okay," she whispered, echoing the promise she'd made to Ethan weeks ago, when everything was uncertain. "You are doing everything you can," Miss Palmer said softly, "and you are not alone." In the quiet that followed, Lily listened to the rhythmic beeping of Ethan's monitors. She remembered that terrible night of screams and sirens, of police lights glaring through the windows. She remembered seeing her father in handcuffs, the horror and confusion that followed. But she also saw the journey since then. Professionals stepping in, truth unveiled, a community rallying behind them, doctors providing real treatment instead of desperate guesswork. This wasn't the ending Lily had imagined, but it was a new beginning. A fragile hope, yes, but hope nonetheless. Leaning close, Lily spoke softly into Ethan's ear, knowing he might be too sleepy to respond. "They're going to take such good care of you," she said. "We'll see each other as soon as we can. And someday we'll all be together again. Maybe not like before, but better than this." She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, remembering how he used to do that for her when she was small and frightened of thunderstorms. Miss Palmer gently touched Lily's shoulder. "We should let him rest," she said. Together, they stepped into the hallway. Lily paused at the doorway, looking back one last time. Ethan, safe and recovering. The photograph, a reminder of love. The quiet hum of machines working to keep him stable. She allowed a faint smile to tug at her lips. Her whispered vow still lingered in the room like a soft echo. "We're going to be okay." As the door clicked softly shut, Lily walked with Miss Palmer toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The Hendersons' path was now defined by healing rather than suffering. They would rebuild their family, piece by painful piece, until kindness and care replaced despair. In that hope, delicate as a spring blossom, lay the promise of better days ahead.